The oppressive weight of silence was the only constant in Clara's life. It was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered sound and warmth in the cavernous dining hall of the Vance estate. The clinking of her sister Blair's fork against fine china was a sharp, brittle sound, like ice cracking. Across the polished mahogany table, her father, Warren Vance, held court, his voice a smooth, deep instrument of power as he spoke of Blair's upcoming marriage, a union that was less about love and more about merging corporate assets. Clara kept her eyes fixed on her plate, tracing the intricate gold leaf pattern with her gaze, trying to make herself as small and unnoticeable as a shadow. Her mother, Genevieve, laughed, a sound as perfectly manicured as her crimson nails. "Blair has always known her duty," she said, her eyes flicking to Clara for a fraction of a second, a glance that held a universe of disappointment. Blair, basking in the praise, preened. "Someone has to secure the family legacy," she added, her words a poisoned dart aimed directly at her silent sister. Clara's hand trembled as she reached for her water goblet. Her fingers, clumsy with nerves, fumbled. The glass tipped, a slow-motion catastrophe that sent a wave of crystal-clear water spreading across the pristine white linen. The conversation stopped. Every head turned. The silence that descended now was different. It was sharp, accusatory, a blade pointed at her throat. Warren's eyes, cold and hard as granite, met hers. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his gaze, was a silent scream of her failure, a promise of later. Clara's breath caught in her chest, a painful knot of shame and fear. She felt her entire being shrink, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her whole, erasing the stain of her existence. Later, she was summoned to her father's study. The room smelled of old leather and cigar smoke, the scent of power and decisions made without her. She stood by the door, her hands clasped behind her back, a ghost in her own home. Warren didn't look at her. He stared out the large window at the darkening grounds, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. "There has been a change of plans regarding your future," he began, his tone flat, as if discussing a stock portfolio. "The family has entered into a strategic pact with the Evernight Dominion, a necessary alliance to secure our borders and our interests." He took a slow sip. "These agreements require a show of good faith, a guarantee, a form of blood collateral." Clara's blood ran cold. She knew of the Evernight Dominion, the lichens, the monsters in the mountains that kept the world in a state of tense, fragile peace. Her father finally turned, his eyes sweeping over her, not with fatherly affection, but with a detached appraisal of a merchant examining defective goods. "You will be that guarantee," he said. "You will go to them. It is a great honor, a chance for you to finally be of use, to repay the debt you have incurred on this family simply by existing. You will be our family's shield." The lie was so bald, so cruel, it almost stole the air from her lungs. A shield. She knew what she was. She was a sacrifice, a broken heirloom being traded away to appease a beast. But she had been trained for this her entire life, to accept, to endure, to be silent. A single slow nod was her only reply. Her throat was a desert, her voice a forgotten memory. In that moment she accepted it. This was her purpose, to be a thing given away to save the things that mattered, her family, their name. The day of the handover was gray and cold. A damp mist clung to the ground, blurring the edges of the world. The journey to the border of the Cascade Mountains was made in that same suffocating silence. Clara had been allowed one small bag. Inside, she had packed a threadbare dress and a small, tarnished silver locket, a gift from a grandmother she barely remembered from a time before the trauma that had stolen her voice. It was the only object she owned that held any warmth. The car stopped at a grim, unmarked line where manicured civilization ended and the wild, untamed forest began. Two figures emerged from the dense pines, colossal shapes that moved with a predatory grace. They were Ronan's warriors. They did not speak, their presence alone a crushing weight. Her father got out of the car, avoiding her eyes. He gestured to her. "This is the offering," he said to the warriors, his voice stripped of its usual authority, sounding small and thin in the vast wilderness. One of the lichens opened her door. Clara stepped out into the frigid air, the scent of pine and wet earth filling her senses. Her father gave her a slight push forward, a final, dismissive gesture. She stumbled, catching herself on the gravel. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She heard the car door slam shut, the engine turn over, and the sound of the tires crunching on the gravel as it drove away. They left without a backward glance, without a single word of farewell. Clara stood alone between two monsters, facing a forest that felt like the end of the world. The cold seeped through her thin coat, but the chill in her bones had nothing to do with the weather. It was the cold of absolute worthlessness. She was a thing discarded. She raised her head, looking into the shadowed depths of the trees, and accepted her fate. She was going to her death, or to a life so brutal it would make her wish for it. And no one in the world would ever know or care. The two Lycan warriors guided her not with force, but with a presence that left no room for disobedience. They moved through the towering pines and into a fortress carved from the mountain itself. The great hall was a cavern of dark wood and stone, vast and intimidating, lit by the flickering orange glow of a dozen hearths that seemed to do little to chase away the deep, primal shadows. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, roasted meat, and something else, a wild electric scent of power that made the fine hairs on Clara's arms stand on end. She was brought to the center of the hall and left there, a small, trembling figure on the cold stone floor. At the far end of the hall, upon a throne of obsidian and petrified wood, sat the Alpha King, Ronan. He was not a man, he was a geological event, taller than any human she had ever seen. His body was a landscape of muscle and old scars, barely contained by the dark leathers he wore. His face was hard, carved from the same stone as his fortress, and his eyes were the color of liquid silver, ancient and predatory, and they were fixed on her. Around his throne, other Lycans stood like statues, their gazes heavy and unreadable. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She did as she had been taught her entire life when faced with overwhelming power. She sank to her knees, bowed her head, and made herself nothing. She stared at the stone floor, at the scuffs on her worn shoes, and waited for the end. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. She could hear the crackle of the fires, the distant howl of a wolf, and the blood roaring in her own ears. Then a sound that cut through her fear, the scrape of stone on stone. It was heavy, deliberate. She risked a glance upward from beneath her lashes. The Alpha King was no longer on his throne. He was descending the dais, his movements possessing a terrifying, fluid grace for a creature so large. Each step he took seemed to shake the very foundations of the whole, of her world. He stopped a few feet in front of her, his immense shadow engulfing her completely. This was it. The blow would come now. She flinched, her shoulders hunching in anticipation of the pain. But the blow never came. Instead, she heard another sound, a soft shifting of leather and a sigh of air. Her mind couldn't process it. She forced herself to look up, her chin trembling. The giant, the monster, the Alpha King Ronan, was kneeling. He had lowered himself to the stone floor, bringing his terrifying silver eyes level with hers. The act was so contrary to every instinct of survival she possessed that it shattered her composure. He wasn't towering over her. He was meeting her where she was, in the dust, on her knees. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not a roar of command, but a deep, resonant murmur that vibrated through the stone and into her bones. "Rise," he said. It was not an order. It was a plea. He didn't move, didn't touch her. He simply waited, his gaze patient. As she slowly, shakily pushed herself to her feet, his eyes caught the faint yellowing bruise on her wrist, a ghost of a grip from one of his warriors who had taken her from her father. A storm gathered in those silver depths, a contained, chilling fury that was not directed at her. It was a fury on her behalf. His jaw tightened, a muscle flexing along the hard line of his cheek. He looked from the mark back to her face, his expression softening into something she had never seen before, something that looked like reverence. He spoke again, his voice a low thunder that redefined her universe. "Your father called you a sacrifice." The words hung in the air, a final confirmation of her worthlessness. Clara's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. Then he delivered the rest, and the world tilted on its axis. "To me, the moon goddess just delivered a gift." The words struck her with more force than any physical blow. A gift? Her? The broken heirloom, the silent freak, the debt paid in flesh. The shock was so profound it left her breathless. He saw the confusion, the disbelief warring in her eyes. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He rose to his full, intimidating height, but the fear was gone, replaced by a bewildering sense of safety. He turned and gestured for her to follow, not to a cell or a dungeon, but toward a corridor leading away from the great hall. He led her through halls of stone and timber, past warriors who stared in stunned silence. Their shock was a mirror of her own. The Alpha King did not escort prisoners. He did not walk beside offerings. He walked beside his equals. He stopped before a heavy oak door and pushed it open, revealing not a cold cell, but a warm, welcoming chamber. A fire blazed in a stone hearth, casting a gentle glow over a bed piled high with soft furs. A simple wooden table held a steaming pitcher and a plate of bread and cheese. Clean clothes, a simple dress of soft wool, were folded neatly on a chair. It was more comfort and care than she had known in a decade. He stood in the doorway, his massive frame filling it, a guardian at the threshold. He didn't enter, giving her the space. His silver eyes met hers one last time. "This is your sanctuary," he rumbled. "No one will harm you here. You are under my protection. You are home." He then gently closed the door, the latch clicking softly into place, leaving her alone in a silence that was not empty or oppressive, but filled with the impossible warmth of a single world-altering promise. For the first time in her life, Clara felt the cold, tight knot of worthlessness in her chest begin to loosen, strand by fragile strand. The sanctuary Ronan had promised was not just the room, but the entire fortress. Ironhold, the heart of the Evernight Dominion, was carved into the living rock of the mountain, yet it felt more alive than any human city. The air, far from being cold and sterile like the Vance estate, was thick with the scent of pine smoke, roasting herbs, and the warm, musky scent of the pack itself. It was the smell of family, of life lived without apology. As Ronan led her from her chambers the next morning, the Lycans she passed did not sneer or look away. They watched her with an unnerving intensity, their eyes, gold, green, and brown, filled with a mixture of curiosity and a deep instinctual respect. They were not looking at a sacrifice. They were looking at the one their alpha had claimed. Their gazes were heavy, but not judgmental. It was the first time in Clara's life she had been looked at and felt seen, not just observed for her flaws. An older she-wolf with silver-streaked hair and eyes the color of warm honey approached them. She bowed her head slightly to Ronan before turning her gentle gaze to Clara. "Alpha King, I am Elara, the pack healer. I will see to her needs." Ronan's silver eyes softened as he looked at Clara. "Elara will care for you. I must attend the council." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her thin, worn dress, a relic of her old life. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of pure displeasure directed at those who had let her suffer. "See that she wants for nothing," he commanded Elara, his voice a low thunder that brooked no argument. Elara led Clara to a chamber deep within the mountain, where steam rose from a vast, sunken pool fed by a natural hot spring. The air was fragrant with chamomile and lavender. It was a stark contrast to the cold, functional baths of her home, where cleanliness was a duty, not a comfort. Here, it felt like a ritual of purification. Elara helped her undress, her hands gentle and practiced, her silence comfortable, not accusatory. As Clara sank into the steaming water, a sigh escaped her lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. The warmth seeped into her bones, chasing away a chill that felt years deep. It melted the tension from her shoulders, the ache from her back, the phantom grip of her father's disapproval. Elara washed her hair, her fingers massaging her scalp, untangling knots both physical and emotional. When she was done, she wrapped Clara in a thick, impossibly soft towel and led her to a room where new clothes were laid out. They were nothing like the stiff, restrictive dresses she was used to. A tunic of dark green wool, soft as a cloud against her skin. Leggings of supple, dark leather that moved with her, not against her. Soft boots lined with fur. When she was dressed, she looked in a polished silver mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The clothes were not for display, they were for living. For the first time, she felt grounded, strong, a part of the mountain itself. Later, she was brought to a communal dining hall where a hearty stew simmered over a central fire. The taste of it, rich with meat and root vegetables, was an explosion of flavor on a palate accustomed to bland, meager portions. She ate until she was full, a simple pleasure she had long forgotten, and no one watched her with disdain. They simply made room for her at the table. Days turned into a week. Clara's silence remained, but it was no longer a cage of fear. Here, in the heart of the pack, it became a vantage point. She watched, she listened, and she learned. Her skill, the one her family had called weirdness, sharpened. She saw the subtle dynamics of the pack, the unspoken alliances, the hidden anxieties. She could tell which warrior had a new pup at home by the softness in his eyes, and which scout was troubled by the tension in his jaw. Her value was revealed during a tense war council. A rival alpha, a slick, handsome wolf named Kale, had come seeking an alliance. He spoke of mutual threats and shared borders, his words smooth as polished stone. The other Lycans seemed convinced, but as Clara sat quietly in a shadowed corner, she saw the truth. She saw the tiny bead of sweat on Kyle's temple, despite the cool air of the hall. She saw the almost imperceptible way his feet were angled toward the exit, a predator ready to bolt. Most of all, she saw the flicker of avarice in his eyes when he looked at Ronan's throne. He wasn't seeking an ally. He was measuring a target. Her heart hammered. To interfere was to draw attention, the one thing she had spent her life avoiding. But to remain silent was to let Ronan walk into a trap. Her loyalty to him, a fierce, protective instinct she hadn't known she possessed, won out. She found a small piece of parchment and a charcoal stick. Her hand trembled as she wrote a single word. She rose, her movements silent, and approached the throne. The entire council fell silent, their eyes on her. She avoided their gazes, focusing only on Ronan. She held out the parchment to him. He took it without hesitation. His silver eyes scanned the single word, lying. He didn't question her. He didn't ask for proof. He simply looked up from the parchment, his gaze locking onto Kale with a new, chilling intensity. His trust in her was absolute, a silent declaration to the entire council. "You speak of shared threats, Kyle." Ronan's voice was dangerously soft. "But I sense the greatest threat in this room is sitting right before me." He leaned forward, his massive presence seeming to suck the air from the hall. "Tell me about the raids on our southern border. Tell me about the silver weapons you've been buying from the human merchants." Kyle's composure shattered. Under Ronan's piercing gaze and the weight of his unexpected knowledge, the rival Alpha crumbled, his lies unraveling into a full confession of treachery. He was dragged from the hall in disgrace. In the stunned silence that followed, every Lycan turned to look at Clara, their expressions transformed. She was no longer just the Alpha's companion. She was the silent eyes of the pack, a weapon more potent than any blade. For the first time, her perceived brokenness was her greatest strength. That night, she found Ronan in his private study, a map of the territories spread across a massive oak table. He was tending to a long gash on his forearm, a wound from a recent sparring match. He stitched it himself, his movements precise, his face a mask of stone. But Clara saw the faint line of pain around his mouth, the tightness in his shoulders. She approached him slowly, her soft boots making no sound. He looked up, his silver eyes meeting hers, and the hardness in them melted away. He was not just an Alpha King. He was a man who carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. Overcome by an impulse she didn't fully understand, she reached out and gently traced the edge of an old, faded scar on his cheek, a silver line that spoke of a battle long past. Ronan froze at her touch, his breath catching in his throat. It was the first time she had initiated contact. Her touch was not one of pity, but of acceptance. She was not just seeing the king. She was seeing the warrior, the man, and all the battles that had made him. The mate bond, which had hummed between them like a low current, surged, snapping into place with the force of a lightning strike. It was a feeling of rightness, of coming home. He slowly covered her hand with his skin warm and calloused against hers. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that was more vow than passion. He looked at her, his soul bare in his silver eyes, a universe of loneliness and longing, finally finding its harbor. "For a century, I have been king," he whispered, his voice a low, raw rumble. "But my throne was always empty. My world was always silent." He gently pulled her closer, his other arm wrapping around her waist, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. He rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "You have filled the silence, Clara." He breathed in her scent, a man finding peace after a lifetime of war. "You will never be alone again." And in the safety of his embrace, nestled against the heart of the monster who had become her sanctuary, Clara finally believed it. The piece of Ironhold was a living thing, a steady heartbeat felt in the stone walls and the murmur of the wind through the pines. But the past is a persistent ghost, and it arrived on a frigid winter morning. A messenger, human and shivering, bore the Vance family crest, requesting an audience with the Alpha King. The news reached Clara in the Pax library, where she was organizing ancient scrolls. The name, Vance, was a cold stone dropped into the warm pool of her new life, sending ripples of remembered fear through her. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the instinct to shrink and disappear. But then, a solid warmth enveloped her from behind. Ronan. He had sensed her distress from across the fortress. His large hand settled on her shoulders, a silent, unshakable fortress around her. He didn't ask if she was all right. He simply stated a fact. "They will not touch you." They were admitted to the great hall, the same hall where she had once knelt, expecting death. Now, she sat on a throne carved of dark wood and obsidian, a twin to Ronan's, a plush wolf pelt warming her back. She wore a simple gown of deep forest green, her only adornment a silver clasp at her shoulder in the shape of a crescent moon. Her hair was clean and braided, her skin held the healthy glow of someone well-fed and cherished. She was no longer a ghost, she was a presence. When Warren, Genevieve, and Blair were led in, the contrast was staggering. They looked diminished by the sheer scale of the hall, their expensive human clothes appearing flimsy and garish against the primal stone and timber. Warren's face was etched with new lines of stress. Genevieve's smile was a brittle painted thing, and Blair's beauty had curdled with a bitter envy that made her features sharp and unpleasant. They saw Clara, and for a moment, their carefully constructed facades crumbled, revealing raw, gaping shock. Warren recovered first, pasting on a smile oozing with false paternal warmth. "Clara, my daughter, he began, his voice echoing unnaturally in the vast space. "It is a relief to see you, thriving." He took a step forward, his eyes flicking to the obvious wealth and power surrounding her. "We have come to call upon the pact we made. Our family, our interests, are in grave peril. We need the protection of your new family." Ronan did not move, but the temperature in the hall dropped by 10 degrees. His silver eyes were chips of ice. "You speak of pacts," he rumbled, his voice a low, threatening growl that vibrated through the stone floor. "You mean the transaction where you sold your child to save your fortunes?" He rose to his full, terrifying height, his shadow falling over the three humans like a death sentence. "You do not have the right to speak her name." He took a step down from the dais, his movement slow, deliberate, the predator cornering his prey. "I know everything," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "I know of the dinners where she was given scraps. I know of the locked rooms. I know of the names you called her." He looked at Genevieve, whose painted smile had frozen in terror. "You stood by and watched." He looked at Warren. "You held the leash." Blair, ever the viper, couldn't contain her scorn. "She's still the same silent freak she always was," she sneered, her voice shrill, hiding behind her monster. That was the moment. The word freak was the final key turning in the lock of Clara's past. Something inside her, a dam of silence and pain built over a decade, finally broke. She stood, every eye in the hall, lichen and human, fixed on her. She looked not at Ronan, but directly at the three people who had authored her suffering. She drew a breath, a shuddering, difficult thing, feeling the mechanics of her own throat, the muscles so long unused. And then she spoke. No, the word was not a shout. It was quiet, clear, and absolutely final. It echoed in the stunned silence of the hall, a single syllable that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. It was a denial of their power, a rejection of their narrative, an annihilation of the broken girl they had created. The shock on their faces was her victory. She drew another breath, this one easier, stronger. "My name is Clara," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Luna of the Evernight Dominion." She looked at them, truly saw them for the first time, small, petty, and powerless. "You are nothing." Ronan's pride in her was a palpable force, a wave of warmth that washed over her. He turned back to the Vances, his face a mask of cold judgment. "You came here seeking a shield," he said, his voice ringing with the authority of a king passing sentence. "There is no shield for you here. Your enemies will have their due. Your empire will fall. You will be stripped of your name, your wealth, and your comfort, and you will live out your days with the consequences of your cruelty." He gestured to his guards. "Escort them out. They are trespassing." As they were dragged away, protesting and pleading, Clara didn't watch them go. She turned her back on them, on the life they represented, and looked at her mate. He descended the final step and took her hand, his large, calloused palm engulfing hers. He led her from the great hall, away from the lingering stain of her past, and out onto a high balcony that overlooked the vast, snow-dusted expanse of his kingdom. Her kingdom. Her. The air was clean and cold, smelling of pine and winter. Below, the territory of the Evernight Dominion stretched to the horizon, a wild and beautiful tapestry of mountain and forest. It was her home, her sanctuary. She leaned her head against Ronan's solid shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. She was not a transaction. She was not a shield or a sacrifice. Her silence had not been a weakness, but a crucible. It had forged in her a sight that could pierce lies and a strength that could withstand tyrants. Her father had thought he was giving away a broken thing to a monster. In the end, he had delivered a queen to her throne. She was not a payment. She was a gift. And for the first time in her life, she knew with every fiber of her being that she was priceless.